35, and it has been 22 years that I have not worked a single day. My daughter, who's 10, does not know what it is to go to work, because I go to the lab. Every day, I live my dream. Every day, I live my passion, and I really hope that each one of you one day will be able to say the same, because there's no price for that, for living your dream. So the journey started slightly surprisingly for me. Both my parents left school, they were 13. No one in my family ever went to secondary school, not university. So that was not necessarily something that was considered accessible to people like me. And from a young age, I was very curious about how things worked. And at some point, my parents thought, oh, he may well become a medical doctor, because that was supposed to be the kingly journey for someone who could do well at school. Except I wasn't necessarily interested in medicine. I was more interested in understanding the mechanisms of life. And for many, many years, I've studied biology. So I started university with a course in cellular and molecular biology. And after 2 years, I started being interested in the brain. And why is it I'm interested in the brain? It's because it is everything we are, almost. And when I often have conversations with mathematicians who make fun sometimes of physicists who use tools that don't necessarily understand to study the world, I ask mathematicians, do you understand the tool with which you study the world, which is your brain? And actually, they don't. And the one thing I want to understand is, why is it we want? What is wanting? What is motivation? And what is going wrong in the brain when we develop disorders related to motivation? And one prototypical such disorder is substance use disorder. So I study what you would call drug addiction, and I also study compulsive disorders, such as obsessive compulsive disorder and impulsive disorders in Parkinson's disease, for instance. And that study led me to realize that in the 21st century, we know nothing. I cannot tell you how we see. I could lecture you for 20 hours or 40 hours on how the retina at the back of our eye breaks down visual information, how different neurons in our visual cortex build back this information together. And at some point, that's it. I will not be able to tell you how that image in our brain is put together. We do not know how we see. And we do not know how we want. And we need to remember that you may well be here because there are things you want, things you're interested in. And I think this is absolutely fascinating, because it may well also be key to understanding what it is to be human. Mind you, many animals want stuff. And it's not because you have language that you are superior to other species when it comes to wanting. When you're starving, you want to eat. An animal will want to eat. An animal will want to mate. And an animal will want to do a lot of things. Of course, less sophisticated than the things we do. But the mechanisms that are going to generate this state of expectation and wanting may well be the same. And I try to understand what makes us different from other animals. And so the journey started off. I did cellular and molecular biology. Then I did a third year and fourth year of university in neurophysiology and neuroscience. And then I did a master's in neuroscience. And then I did a PhD in neuropharmacology. And I came to Cambridge afterwards. And I started a postdoc in psychology. So at the end of the day, I have no real specialization. I'm not a very good psychologist. I'm not a very good molecular biologist. I'm not a very good cellular biologist. I'm not very good at anything in particular. But I've just followed what I wanted. And I've systematically invested my time as if today was the last day of my life, trying to learn as much as I could about what I liked at the moment and what I wanted at the moment. And well, after a couple of years, I went back to France, set up a lab at the French NIH, came back to Cambridge in 2013, first in pharmacology. Mind you, I'm not a pharmacologist, but still. And then I came back to psychology in 2016. And every single day, I have just done what I always dreamt I would do. Since I was 8, I wanted to be a scientist. So it didn't happen like this. And there were a couple of traps along the way. The first thing I've learned is that, unfortunately, scientists, as any other human being, are not necessarily always very good people. When I was your age, I thought that a scientist should be someone who interacts with the world through the point of view of data-driven discussions, opinions, someone who should be above self-interest, someone who should dedicate their life to creating knowledge, first of all because it's what they like, and secondly because they are paid most of the time by taxpayers' money to deliver knowledge to humankind. And I realized very quickly that many scientists are not at all like this. And that was the very first frustration I experienced, that actually many scientists are not necessarily good people. And it just took one in my life to actually make me understand that some of them can be very good people, as a matter of fact. And because many scientists are not necessarily good people, if you are succeeding early enough, they won't necessarily like you to grow as fast as you may well. That's the reason why I had to leave France to come to the UK, for instance. So there have been difficulties along the way. And for each one of these difficulties, the only reason why I kept going was because my wanting to understand, my wanting to do experiments, was just got the better of me. And I never thought about what comes next until I had a baby. Before I could be selfish, my partner at the time is also a scientist. We both live our passion, and we just thought about what we are doing now. And things just happened. I guess because we were committed and we were working hard, they happened. And then at some point, the next frustration was that you realize that often, if you are not a genius, you can't do everything very well. And when you have a child, then, well, you have to let go a little bit of your passion because you have no choice, because I wanted to spend time with my child. And you realize then that, to some extent, science is a bit of a selfish journey, because you enjoy so much what you do. That's what you do. And at some point, well, there are conflicts in life about love for your partner, love for your child, and each time you learn to readjust. I'm sharing that with you not because I want to overshare, just because as a human being and as someone who's passionate about research, I've realized that sometimes if you are too passionate about what you do, you can also forget that there's life around your research. And to some extent, forgetting about life contributes to a tunnel vision about what it is you do. And there are a lot of ideas that I've had in my research that came from my real life around research. And it's always a balance that is not easy to maintain, especially when other motivations, such as the love for your child, comes into play. And surprisingly enough, it takes adjustment. It really does take adjustment. And then the real challenge I have experienced as a scientist is that the more you grow, the less you actually do science. So now I have a lab of 10 people. It's not a very big lab, but I could not have more people because I care for the people with whom I work. They do not work for me. We work together. We're a team. I've got postdocs. I've got PhD students. I've got undergraduate students in the lab. And I've realized very quickly that as soon as you have someone working with you and you are their mentor, you are responsible for their failures and they are responsible for their successes. And my job now is to ensure that the people who work with me succeed. And I will consider my contribution to science not as my own contribution as a scientist in the discoveries I may have made, but in the extent to which the people with whom I've worked and whom I've trained will have made a change. My job is to foster a new generation of scientists. And that was the most difficult part of my life, to accept that at some point I should not be jealous of the young members of my lab with whom I worked. Because for years and years and years, when you do experiments, you often end up alone in the lab. It's 11 p.m. You finished all the analysis. You've done all the control quality data, everything. Now it's 11:30, it's midnight. You press OK on your statistical analysis software, and here come the data. And I've got goosebumps right now. At that moment, you are the only one in the world to know what you've just produced. These results are just known to you right now. And that's what research is about, right? Now, I've got members of my lab coming in my office with stars in their eyes, and I know they've just done that the day before. And for several years, I had a knot in my stomach. I was a bit jealous, envious of them, because I could no longer have the time to do these kind of things. And then I realized perhaps this is exactly the point in time where some scientists become bad people, or not as good people as they should be. Because if you no longer have that, then perhaps there's one way, which is I'm going to claim it as my own. I'm becoming a big guy. All the papers in my lab, these were my ideas. This is mine, 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 because I do not produce it anymore. Or you learn to let it go and say, well, let's celebrate it together, but my job is to make sure that you can experience this. And the more senior you get, the more distance you get from the data. And if you have nice colleagues, which I'm privileged to have, they would sometimes send me a text at 4 p.m. and say, David, do you have any plans tonight? And I know that they've kept from pressing this OK button, and we'll do it together. And we would spend the night, trying to extract as much knowledge from this data together. They give me that back sometimes. And you realize this is something I can't live without. Creating new knowledge, even though this is knowledge that interests only perhaps myself, perhaps just myself and the people in my lab, or a handful of people in the world. As a matter of fact, this is new knowledge. And that is what we're here for. As a servant to society, my job is to be honest, to be committed, and to create that new knowledge, which I hope one day may well help society. I have no idea, and I would not pretend that it does help now. I do not know whether it will eventually. But if we don't try, actually we don't get anything. So my hope is that one day it will help. But irrespective of the consequences of that work, my view is I would have given all I could so that eventually it will help. And while I do that, I live my dream. And to some extent, I believe that's what an academic life offers those who invest in this kind of line of work. It gives you the freedom to pursue your dreams, and it enables you to live from living your dreams. And that is a real privilege. Coming from a family where actually what both my parents earned was not sufficient to feed us. So that's the beauty of it. So you may well have heard, life in academia is hell. And academics are not very well paid. All of that is actually, as a matter of fact, it's true. But in that case, why would people still do it? It's because most of the time, they have this want. They have actually, it's a need. I need to create new data. I need to be given data. I need to challenge dogmas. Almost each one of the papers we've published in the past 10 years has led to a complete revision of things you find in textbooks, and you found them for 40 years. things we believe were established facts, actually, we manage to completely challenge them. And we always thrive to challenge what we've already done. Knowledge is a dynamic thing. It takes centuries to have something that I would call an absolute fact. And even absolute facts, sometimes, after a couple of centuries, are challenged. So knowledge is very dynamic and fluid, and it's difficult to keep hold of it. The only way to accept that it is such is to realize that the more you know, the more you realize that you know nothing. And the real knowledge is in accepting that you know very little, and you should always try to know more. And before you try to expand what it is you know, it's better to refine the knowledge you already have. Because by doing this, you're getting closer to the current truth. But at least you challenge your own opinions. And scientists have opinions like everyone else. But having an opinion is the betrayal of having lack of knowledge. Either I know or I have an opinion. And sometimes I know that what I know may well be true now, may not be true in 20 years. When I have an opinion, it's because I don't know. So my opinion is not better than anyone else. And that's the beauty of having a debate. When you learn from each other's opinion and you try to enrich your view of the world based on your acknowledgement of an absolute absence of knowledge. That's what an opinion is. That's what debating is. And that's what human interaction is about. And to some extent, scientists should be those who have the least polarized view of the world, because they should open themselves to debate, and they should acknowledge that their opinions are not better than anyone else. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily the way it works. There are always what we call churches of thought or ideas when there are very strong debates, but there are still strong debates. And I really hope that if science helps society in some way, is to maintain this skill, which is a very important skill for human interaction, of open debate, and try to break the current way society is getting towards polarized view. And that's one of the great important missions of science. I think my time is due. Thank you very much for your attention.